Theresa May changes position on Brexit. She says she will try to reopen negotiations on the withdrawal agreement. After the massive defeat a fortnight ago, the British Prime Minister makes her pitch to those against her plan.
Today, we have the chance to show the European Union what it will take to get a deal through this House of Commons.
I'm Philippa Thomas at Westminster, where MPs are now only a couple of hours from votes that could shape the future of Brexit.
And how will Brussels react? The EU has consistently said the withdrawal agreement will not be reopened. Also on Global, Venezuela's self-declared interim president speaks to the BBC. Juan Guaido says his country is living under a dictatorship and people must make a choice.
In Venezuela, we either take domination, oppression and torture, or we choose freedom, democracy and prosperity for our people.
And President Trump's longtime political ally Roger Stone has just appeared in court in Washington. He pleaded not guilty to charges stemming from the Mueller investigation. Hello and welcome to the programme. Theresa May says she will seek legal changes to the withdrawal agreement with the EU as she faces a series of crucial votes that could change the course of Brexit. Conservative MPs have been told to back a vote which would demand a new way to avoid a visible border in Ireland. Another motion the British Parliament will vote on is backed by the main opposition and would delay Brexit if an agreement is not reached by next month. The EU has repeatedly said they will not reopen the withdrawal agreement. So let's go back to Westminster and go back to Philippa Thomas. A blur of amendments and votes, Philippa. But what is the latest feeling you're getting about the way MPs are likely to tilt?
I think, Matthew, some of them are still reeling about the change of course we've had from the Prime Minister today, because this is a U-turn from Theresa May after months and months of saying the deal I've reached has been negotiated. That's it, take it or leave it. What she said today is, you wanted to leave it. I know we have to think again. I'm taking this back to the European Union. Let's have a look at how she put it as she opened her statement in the House of Commons a couple of hours ago.
A good deal that sets us on course for a bright future. That's what I believe this House wants. It's what this government wants. It's what I want. And it is what the British people want. And today, we have the chance to show the European Union what it will take to get a deal through this House of Commons. What it will take to move beyond the confusion and division and uncertainty that now hangs over us and onto the bright, new, close, open relationship that we want to build and can build with our European friends in the years ahead.
Well, Theresa May is asking MPs, especially those in her own governing Conservative Party, to back one of these amendments in particular, called the Brady Amendment, and basically says to the EU, the Irish backstop deal between Northern Ireland as a part of the UK and the Irish Republic staying part of the EU, that deal isn't going to work here at Westminster. We need you to think again. Let's get some analysis first from our political reporter Naomi Grimley. It is a change of course. What's she hoping for?
It's a risky change, of course. Let's not be in any doubt about it, because she herself said before Christmas to MPs that there was no chance of reopening the withdrawal agreement with Brussels. Indeed, she said she'd caution against it because once you start unpicking it, other EU nations like France might want to put their new stamp on it. And yet she's done this dramatic about turn. It's really a last-minute bid to get her own party back behind her so that she will have extra leverage, or so she thinks, with Brussels. But the big question is, will Brussels actually offer anything anymore, especially if they feel that the strongest cards still lie with them?
And what about what MPs are going to do in the next couple of hours?
So because we've had this deadlock, if you like, for the last few weeks where Parliament hasn't actually been able to say what it would positively like to happen over the next few months, there are now going to be some votes which will help whittle down, if you like, the options. Now, one set of MPs want to see Brexit delayed for at least a few months to give Britain more time to come up with a proper deal with the EU. Another amendment wants to do what Theresa May wants, in other words, to demand more from Brussels. And another one is suggesting there's almost a kind of week of hustings where MPs go through all the different options and work out how many people actually back each one of them. So there's a variety of options. The whole idea is to bring new clarity, but whether it will is another matter.
It doesn't get any simpler, does it? Naomi, thank you very much for that. And we're going to get you another perspective now, just thinking about how difficult all this is to deal with within the next 2 months. I'm joined now by Hannah White from the Institute for Government. Hannah, how would you characterise where we are right now?
Well, in a very dramatic moment. I mean, as you've been saying, this is a really dramatic shift from Theresa May to go from saying, my deal is the only deal and the backstop is integral to that, to saying, actually, no, I'm prepared to go back to the EU and I think I might get something different that I can bring back and I can have my meaningful vote and that might pass.
She's saying that even though within the last 24, 48 hours we've heard from senior figures in the EU, we're not reopening negotiations.
Well, that is exactly what the EU has said up to this point. Now, clearly, in any negotiation, both sides have their negotiating positions and they stick to those negotiating positions until they shift. And it is possible that the EU will decide to shift on something. But it does, when Theresa May was talking about the amendment that she now wants MPs to support in the House, the Brady Amendment, which is very simple. It just says we'll look for alternative arrangements rather than the backstop. She linked that to this new idea which has emerged very recently from a group of Conservative backbenchers and MPs saying, actually including ministers, saying, well, perhaps there's a plan C. And the question is whether those are the terms of this new plan C are something that she's thinking of pursuing.
Yeah, there's been a lot, hasn't there, in the British papers and here at Westminster, a lot of chat about this deal that's being cooked up between Brexiteers and Remainers in the Conservative Party. Is it essentially a managed no deal?
So that's the second part of it. The first part of it is another attempt to renegotiate the backstop. So to go back and say we want essentially what the ERG, the Conservative Brexiteer group, were previously arguing for, something which is a sort of maximum facilitation type version of the backstop, which the EU has rejected in the past.
Juan Guaido appears to be the man of the moment. Venezuela's opposition leader, recognized by the United States as the new head of state over Nicolas Maduro, following elections widely seen as tainted. In his first interview with the BBC, the Western-backed leader asserted his legitimacy.
The Venezuelan constitution states that it's the head of the parliament who's in charge of the presidency. And when a power vacuum occurs, they have to call for free elections.
In recent weeks, they've been running battles with demonstrators and security forces, but also peaceful protests among ordinary Venezuelans, tired of rampant inflation and plundering of state coffers. As Nicolas Maduro remains defiant, backed by his military, it's now time to turn the tide, says his rival.
Nos debatimos en Venezuela entre la dominación.
In Venezuela, we either take domination, oppression and torture, or we choose freedom, democracy and prosperity for our people.
In the strongest sign yet of a ratcheting up of pressure on the Maduro government, the US has imposed sanctions on the state-owned oil giant PDVSA. 90% of the country's revenues are generated by oil. Russia accusing the US of an act of aggression. But Washington says it's turned off the tap to prevent Maduro's government looting state oil reserves. What's more, it's now a question of national security.
Civil society in Venezuela is disintegrating. The economy is in a state of collapse. Something in the range of 3 to 4 million refugees have already fled the country for neighboring countries in the United States.
As thousands of Venezuelans continue to head for the borders, ordinary people are finding themselves pawns in old Cold War rivalries, as global powers for and against a new way forward dig in. Karen Allen, BBC News.
Now let's take a look at the day's other main global stories. And police in Brazil have arrested 2 employees from a German company which carried out safety inspections of the dam which collapsed last week. The firm, which is based in Munich, confirmed the arrest to German media. The firm inspected the dam belonging to the Brazilian mining company back in June and September of last year. The Supreme Court in Pakistan has rejected a legal challenge to the acquittal of a Christian woman who'd been sentenced to death for blasphemy. Asia Bibi spent 8 years on death row before her conviction was overturned in October. The ruling paves the way for her to leave the country. Leaders from the southern EU countries of France, Greece, Italy, Malta, Portugal, Spain and Cyprus are meeting in Nicosia for their 5th summit. Topping the agenda is security, migration and energy issues. Last year's summit pledged to address the root causes of mass migration as well as to reform the common European asylum system. Now, people in China and some neighbouring countries have been celebrating Xiaonian, or the Little New Year, a festival traditionally held 1 week before the Lunar New Year. It's also celebrated as the Day of the Kitchen Gods, who keep homes warm and families happy and united. In Henan province in central China, artists are also performing the Lion Dance to bring luck in the new spring. Let's go back to the US. Britain, after becoming the latest member of Trump's inner circle charged in Special Counsel Robert Mueller's Russia investigation. Here are some of the pictures of Roger Stone actually leaving the court just a short while ago amid, as you can see, a large press scrum. He's accused of making false statements to Congress, obstruction of an official proceeding and witness tampering. So let's go back to Washington and go back to our correspondent Regina Vaidyanathan following this story for us and take us through, because it was a pretty brief court appearance, wasn't it?
It was a very short court appearance. Roger Stone arrived just before 11 a.m. this morning to a court in Washington, D.C. this time on Friday. After he was first arrested, he appeared in court in Florida. He's now in Washington. And as I say, it was a very short appearance. His lawyer said that his client pleaded not guilty to all of those 7 counts that you outlined, Matthew. And he is now due back in court on the 1st of February on Friday for what's known as a status hearing. Now, he is still on $250,000 bail. He's only permitted to travel to a certain number of cities, I think Florida and New York and DC, and he's been told not to talk to any witnesses.
Now, in terms of the wider Russia investigation, I mean, what is the reaction to those comments in the last 24 hours from the acting Attorney General saying the Mueller inquiry is coming pretty close to the end?
Matthew, we've been hearing that in Washington for weeks now. I remember just before Christmas people thinking, oh, the Mueller investigation's going to wrap up soon. So, I mean, that's just a hint. We certainly know that Donald Trump, the president, has already given his written answers to the special counsel, and his personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, said a couple of weeks ago that they were not going to be submitting any more. We're starting to see more of these indictments come out. So that would give us an indication that perhaps things are wrapping up. In terms of this Roger Stone charge sheet, I think one thing that most people took away from it last week is the fact that this all relates to the release of a number of emails that were stolen from the servers of the Democratic National Committee during the 2016 election campaign. Now, it is alleged that those emails were stolen from the Democrats by the Russians, but they were published on the WikiLeaks website. And this charge sheet talks about and claims that Roger Stone was talking to WikiLeaks about these emails and also talking to the Trump campaign at the time. Now, none of these charges that he has been charged on at the moment relate to anything to do with collusion or anything like that, but this charge sheet does give an indication of the areas that the Mueller campaign is looking at as this investigation continues.
All right, Regina, thanks very much for that. Thank you. Well, let's stay in Washington because members of Donald Trump's administration have been giving senators their assessment of the global threats facing America's national security. The head of the intelligence community said Russia and China pose the biggest espionage and cyber attack threats and are more aligned than they've been in decades.
We anticipate China will attempt to further solidify and increase its control within its immediate sphere of influence in the South China Sea and its global presence further abroad. Whereas with China, we must be concerned about the methodological and long-term efforts to capitalize on its past decade of a growing economy and to match or overtake our superior global capabilities. Russia's approach relies on misdirection and obfuscation as it seeks to destabilize and diminish our standing in the world. Even as Russia faces a weakening economy, the Kremlin is stepping up its campaign to divide Western political and security institutions and undermine the post-World War II international order.
Now, still to come on today's programme. What will the reaction be in Brussels to Theresa May's change of course on Brexit? She's now hoping to reopen talks over the withdrawal agreement.
His friends just dropped in. Their demand.
Have been listening. I was watching the deputy EU negotiator only yesterday, her frustration when asked about alternative arrangements. She just said absolutely bluntly, they do not exist.
Yes, and we understand that the EU position is unlikely to change this evening. As soon as they will have the results of those votes in London, we are expecting statements to come out from here, and the briefing is that those statements will repeat that the EU is not going to renegotiate the deal that has taken more than a year to settle. The EU doesn't think that there are technological solutions, doesn't think that introducing time limits into the provisions in that deal already would help solve anything. And on top of that, as you were hearing yesterday from Sabine Weyand, the deputy to Michel Barnier, the deputy chief negotiator, the EU's position is that this agreement on the table is an agreement that Theresa May has shaped. It's been shaped from more than a year ago by her agreeing to special provisions for Ireland, shaped over the course of a year by her red lines and her demands for to cover the whole of the UK, and therefore it's been constructed in a way that she wanted. So now if she comes back again seeking to undo those changes and do those measures and seek new things, I think the impression is very unlikely to succeed.
Just a sentence, if you would, Damien. We keep hearing the lines I hear in interviews all the time that when it gets to the final moments, the EU will blink. Do you get any sense of that?
Well, that is the crucial question. Now they are saying no. When the pressure is really on, if this process continues towards that end date, then I think what EU side say, it may be a question, would Ireland want them to shift? Because Ireland, of course, is the sort of front line of this. If Ireland signalled yes, then possibly, but no sign of that at the minute.
All right, Damien Grammaticus, live for us there in Brussels. Thanks a lot. Now, as cold snaps go, it is going to be a bad one. The intense blast of Arctic air is predicted to put large parts of the US in their deepest freeze for decades. Forecasters fear the wind chill could plummet to minus 50 or minus 60 in some parts of Midwest. Have a look. Thomas Schaffenacker is the BBC weather presenter. He explained how those sorts of temperatures can affect the human body.
When temperatures get so low, and the forecast in Chicago is for something like minus 27 degrees Celsius, that's on the thermometer, you get a bit of a wind, and the way how we perceive cold is the temperature of the air plus the wind. And when we talk about the feels-like temperature of minus 50, 60 degrees, well, skin starts to freeze within a couple of minutes. You get ice crystals forming in the skin, and then that causes all sorts of problems there. You've got blood vessels constricting because of the cold as well, and then you get that severe frostbite. So it's very dangerous.
And in terms, as we look at these, some of the latest pictures, why is it so bad this year, and how long is it likely to last, do you think?
Yeah, so we've often talked about something called stratospheric warming in meteorology. That's a very, very technical term, but just to briefly describe it very, very basically, something that happens high up in the atmosphere, a certain disruption in regular weather patterns, and that kind of propagates close and closer to the ground. And basically what we're seeing is very cold Arctic air coming straight out of Arctic Canada. You can see sitting there on top of the Midwest, and that wind there, that's the jet stream. So you can see a dip in the jet stream there, and within that we've got that cold Arctic air sitting. And how long is it going to last? We're talking about 3-4 days, which doesn't seem very long, but if it's going to be down to minus 30 nearly degrees, that is long enough.
And just briefly on this, I mean, you pinpointed the Midwest. Is that where it's centred, or is this right across the United States?
No, it is around the Midwest. That's where the lowest temperatures will be. We're talking about Minneapolis, Chicago, Detroit. New York is also going to be feeling the cold. But the absolutely crazy thing is that in Chicago, by the time we say we get to Saturday, it's going to be plus 7 or 9 degrees. We're talking about a 40-degree difference.
Thomas Shafak, we have special coverage of all of those votes. It starts in half an hour, but Focus is up here next. Bye-bye.